The history of the world is not found in the gold-leafed scrolls of the temple, nor in the arrogant stone pillars of Rome. True history is a shadow, a living, breathing thing kept alive by the firelight of the Levant's oldest plans. For generations, the elders of the desert tribes have whispered a different gospel. They speak of the silent years of the young Messiah, the 18 years of dust and stone before the Jordan's water ever touched his brow. They tell of a carpenter who did not just build tables and chairs, but who walked into the jagged mouth of the abyss to face the things that crawl in the dark. These are the oral traditions of the exiles, the stories of a young man named Joshua who moved through the mountains like a phantom, confronting ancient curses and nameless terrors that the Bible chose to forget. Listen now, for this is the account of the war fought in the silence of the Galilee, the hidden struggle that forged the light of the world. Part 1. The frozen mercy of the silent warden. The air atop the ridges of Upper Galilee did not belong to the world of men. It was a thin, predatory ether that tasted of ancient flint and the breath of the stars. In the summer of his 24th year, Joshua walked these heights with two companions, Nathan, a mason of immense strength, and Caleb, a young apprentice whose heart was as light as a desert sparrow. They were journeying toward the foothills of Mount Hermon, carrying tools to repair a crumbling cistern for a village of shepherds. The morning had been a symphony of light. They had sung the psalms of ascent, their voices echoing off the limestone cliffs. But as the sun crossed the meridian, the atmosphere shifted with a violent, supernatural suddenness. A wall of leaden mist, thick as wool and cold as a tomb, rolled down from the peak. It didn't just block the light, it seemed to consume sound itself. The air, it smells of iron, Nathan whispered, his voice trembling. Joshua stopped. He felt the vibration beneath the earth, a low, rhythmic thrumming that sounded like a titan's heartbeat. He looked at his companions. Nathan, the man of stone and muscle, was suddenly swaying. His face had drained of all color, turning the sickly shade of wet ash. A fever, violent and predatory, had ignited in his marrow. His forehead burned with a heat that was not of a natural sickness, but a spiritual fire. "We must find shelter," Joshua commanded. His voice was the only thing that held the mist at bay. "The mountain has opened its mouth, and it does not intend to close it until it has fed." Through the blinding gray, they stumbled upon a remote stone way station, a Beth Hekesh, a house of stone built into the side of a cliff. As they pushed through the heavy cedar door, the warmth of the interior was not comforting, it was suffocating. The house was packed with travelers who had been caught in the unnatural storm. They sat in silence, their eyes wide with a hollow, primal dread. The keeper of the house, an old man whose skin looked like weathered parchment, looked at Nathan's gray face and recoiled. "I have no room for the dying," the keeper hissed, his voice a dry rattle. "Every floor is taken, every corner is occupied by those who fear the fog." Joshua stepped forward. The divine weight of his presence seemed to push back the very walls of the room. He did not speak a word, yet the keeper felt a searing heat emanate from the young carpenter's eyes. "There is the room in the back," the keeper stammered, pointing a crooked finger toward a low, heavy door at the end of a dark corridor. "It is damp, it is cold, and it is already occupied by a guest who will never leave. We found him on the trail 3 days ago, frozen in a sitting position. He waits there for the porters of the dead." Joshua led Caleb and the unconscious Nathan into the room. It was a vault of shadows. The air was stagnant, smelling of deep earth and the bitter scent of hyssop used for cleansing. In the far corner, a figure sat perfectly still, wrapped tightly in a heavy, dark wool shroud. It was the silent guest, a climber who had been claimed by the mountain's frost. Joshua laid Nathan on the floor beside the corpse. Caleb huddled in the corner, his teeth chattering, his prayers coming in frantic, broken whispers. "Master, Caleb whimpered. Why is the air so heavy? It feels like someone is standing on my chest. Sleep, Caleb, Joshua said softly. The mountain is testing the weight of your soul. Do not let it find you wanting. As the hours passed into the deep of night, the room became a theater of the supernatural. Joshua remained seated, his back against the stone wall, his eyes open and fixed on the shrouded figure in the corner. The oil lamp flickered and died, leaving only the pale, spectral light of the mist filtering through the high, narrow window. At the stroke of midnight, the silence was broken, not by a sound, but by a shift in the temperature. The room didn't just get colder, it became an icebox. The breath from Joshua's lungs hung in the air like frozen ghosts. From within the dark shroud of the dead guest, something began to move. It was not a physical movement of muscle and bone, but a shifting of energy. Two hands, long and elegant, made of a translucent, gray light, began to emerge from the wool. They were spectral, shimmering like the surface of a disturbed lake. Caleb moaned in his sleep as the silent warden leaned forward. The entity did not have a face, only a void where features should be, but it radiated a profound, ancient sorrow. It reached out toward Nathan, whose fever was now so intense that steam seemed to rise from his skin. The spectral hands descended. They did not claw or strike. They rested with an agonizing gentleness upon Nathan's forehead. Joshua did not move. He did not reach for a weapon. He simply watched, his presence a pillar of white fire in the gloom. He saw the gray hands begin to glow with a dull, sickly orange light as they began to absorb the fever. The silent warden was acting as a lightning rod, drawing the demonic fire out of Nathan's blood and into its own eternal, frozen essence. The entity let out a sound, a vibration that resonated in the marrow of Joshua's bones. It was a sound of suffering, the sound of a soul that was using its own damnation to save another. Joshua spoke then. His voice was a low, resonant frequency that shook the dust from the ceiling. It was the voice of the architect speaking to the ruins. You who are trapped between the breath and the void, Joshua said, you seek to offer a final sacrifice with the cold that claimed you. You are a memory of mercy in a house of stone. The creator of the stars sees your labor. The spectral figure paused. It turned its void-like head toward Joshua. For a brief moment, the room was filled with a blinding, golden light, the reflection of the Father in the eyes of the Son. The silent warden bowed its head, a gesture of absolute submission, and then the gray hands faded back into the dark wool. By the first light of dawn, the porters arrived. They carried the silent guest away before the house awoke. Unaware of the miracle that had occurred in the dark, Nathan sat up, his skin clear, his eyes bright. He looked around the room, confused. I had a dream, Nathan said, his voice strong. I was in a lake of fire, but a man of ice stood over me. He took the flames into his own heart so that I could breathe. Joshua stood at the threshold of the house, looking out at the rising sun. The mist had vanished, leaving the peaks sharp and clear against the blue. He looked at his own hands, the hands that would one day be pierced, and he knew that this was but a small skirmish. He had seen the dead serving the living, a foreshadowing of the day he would descend into the heart of the earth to break the gates of brass forever. He led his companions back onto the trail. Caleb and Nathan laughed, celebrating the morning air, but Joshua walked in silence. He carried the weight of the room in his heart, knowing that the mountains were not just stone, but the front lines of a war that had been raging since the beginning of time. Part 2. The Gulch of the Unmapped Void. The mountains of the Levant do not merely consist of limestone and dust. They are a vast, petrified memory of a world that existed before the dawn of man. 2 years after the encounter with the silent warden, Joshua found himself in the jagged, sun-scorched wilderness of the Kidron Valley, a place where the earth is torn open like a festering wound. He was accompanied by a seasoned scout named Eli and a young, headstrong merchant named Simon. They were searching for a man from a nearby village, a father who had wandered into the hills looking for a lost lamb and had not returned. The villagers spoke in hushed tones of the shifting ravines, places where the sun rises in the west and the shadows move independently of the light. "The air is changing," Eli whispered, gripping his staff until his knuckles turned white. "It tastes of ozone and wet copper. This is not the trail we walked an hour ago." Joshua stopped. He looked at the ground, but there were no footprints, only a fine, silver dust that seemed to vibrate with a low, humming frequency. The cliffs around them, once familiar and weathered, began to stretch upward, their surfaces becoming unnaturally smooth, like polished obsidian. "The geography is bleeding," Joshua said, his voice a calm anchor in a sea of rising madness. "We have stepped into a place that the Father's hand left unfinished. It is a hollow in the world, a trap for the curious and the proud." As they moved deeper into the gulch, the sensory distortions became violent. The sound of a rushing river echoed from the dry canyon walls. But there was no water. Simon let out a cry of terror as he pointed to a row of ancient terebinth trees. From their branches hung hundreds of red silk ribbons, fluttering in a wind that did not exist. "Those weren't here a moment ago," Simon gasped. "Who tied them? Why do they look like they're bleeding?" Joshua approached one of the trees. He did not see silk, he saw tethers of spiritual obsession. Each ribbon was a physical manifestation of a thought, a prayer to a dark god, a desperate vow made in fear, a memory of a soul that had lost its way in this labyrinth. "These are the markers of the lost," Joshua spoke, his hand hovering inches from the red fabric. "Each ribbon represents a man who realized he was no longer on earth and tried to tie himself to a reality that was already fading. They are the anchors of the damned." Suddenly, the laughter began. It was not the laughter of a man, but the sound of 1,000 dry leaves skittering across a tombstone. It came from the trees, from the rocks, and from the very air they breathed. It was a mocking, rhythmic sound that seemed to synchronize with their own heartbeats. Eli collapsed to his knees, clawing at his ears. "The walls, Joshua, the walls are moving." It was true. The obsidian cliffs were closing in, the narrow path shrinking with every breath. The sky above was no longer blue, but a swirling, bruised purple, devoid of sun or stars. They were being swallowed by the unmapped void, a pocket of existence where the laws of time and space had been inverted by an ancient, nameless curse. In the center of the narrowing path, they found the man they were looking for, or rather, they found what was left of him. He was sitting cross-legged on a flat rock, his eyes wide and vacant, staring into a void that only he could see. Beside him, his backpack and sandals were placed with terrifying neatness. He was holding a piece of parchment, his fingers bone white and trembling. Joshua stepped forward, his feet silent on the silver dust. He took the parchment from the man's hand. It was a map, but the ink was shifting, the lines of the mountains crawling across the page like black worms. The man had tried to map the abyss, and the abyss had mapped him in return. "I found the door," the man whispered, his voice sounding as if it came from a great distance. "But the door has no handle on this side. I am the ink on the page now. I am the laughter in the trees." The laughter intensified, becoming a deafening roar of derision. The red ribbons began to lash out like whips, coiling around Simon and Eli, dragging them toward the obsidian walls. Joshua stood in the center of the chaos, his figure a silhouette of absolute, unshakable divinity. He did not cry out, he did not flee. He simply closed his eyes and reached out his spirit to the foundations of the world. "I am the way," Joshua proclaimed. The words did not travel through the air, they shattered it. The divine frequency of the Creator's Son hit the obsidian cliffs like a hammer. The laughter was silenced instantly. The red ribbons withered into gray ash and fell to the ground. The bruised sky cracked open, and a single, piercing ray of pure, golden sunlight tore through the purple gloom. The distortions vanished. The cliffs returned to their weathered limestone forms. The unmapped void was forcibly ejected back into the darkness from which it had crawled. Joshua looked at the man on the rock. The life had returned to his eyes, but it was a fragile, broken thing. He was no longer a part of the abyss, but the abyss would always be a part of him. "Go," Joshua told Simon and Eli, who were gasping for air on the dusty trail. "Carry him back to the world of men. Tell them the mountains have ears, and the valleys have memories. Tell them that pride is the map that leads to the void." As they descended back toward the village, Joshua lingered at the mouth of the gulch. He looked back at the trees, now silent and bare. He knew that this was a victory of territory, a reclamation of a piece of the Father's earth that had been occupied by the enemy for eons. He felt the weight of the souls still trapped in such places, the thousands of red ribbons still fluttering in the hidden corners of the world. He understood then that his mission was not just to save the living, but to bridge the gap between the real and the unreal, to close the doors that man had no business opening. The sun set over the Judean hills, casting long, peaceful shadows, but Joshua's eyes remained fixed on the horizon, for he knew that the greatest labyrinth of all, the labyrinth of the human heart, was still waiting for him. Part 3. The resonance of the shattered echoes. In the final year of his hidden life, before the heavens would open over the Jordan, Joshua journeyed through the desolate canyons of the Transjordan. He was accompanied by Thomas, a man whose mind was a fortress of logic and doubt, and a former centurion named Marcus, who had traded his gladius for a seeker's staff. The air in these deep ravines was stagnant, trapped by basalt walls that seemed to soak up the sun without ever becoming warm. While resting in a cave that had once served as a tomb for an forgotten king, Marcus uncovered an object that defied the era. It was a black stone vessel, shaped like a lung, etched with silver filigree that pulsed with a faint, rhythmic violet light. As Thomas touched the vessel, it did not emit heat, but a sound. It was the recording of the damned, a spiritual artifact that captured the final vibrations of souls lost to the abyss. The three witnesses of the void. The vessel began to vibrate, and a voice erupted from the stone. It was clear, yet it sounded as if it were being filtered through 1,000 years of grave dirt. The first record, a man's voice, trembling with a frantic, misplaced hope. "I hear them, just beyond the ridge. My family is calling my name. They have a fire and bread. I am going to them, even though the stars are the wrong color." "He is walking into a trap," Marcus whispered, his hand on his dagger. "That voice, it has no blood in it." The second record, the sound of a heavy, rhythmic thumping, like a drum made of bone. The voice had devolved into a whimpering staccato. "It is closer now. It doesn't walk, it ripples. I thought the Lord would hear me. But the sky is made of brass. It is mimicking my mother's lullaby. But the words are backwards. It is right behind the tent flap. Please, if anyone finds this, do not listen to the songs." The third record. There was no more preamble. The voice that came next was a sound of absolute, crystalline terror. It was the sound of a throat being turned into an instrument of the void. It spoke only 3 words, but they carried the weight of a dying sun. "I am found." Then, the vessel emitted a fourth sound, a voice that was not human. It was a deep, subharmonic resonance that felt like a tectonic plate grinding against a soul. It was a mockery of a greeting, a predatory purr that filled the cave. "Found you." The command over the silence. Thomas fell back, his face a mask of horror. "It is a trap. The stone is calling out to things in this very canyon. Joshua, we must flee." The shadows in the cave began to elongate. detaching themselves from the walls. They did not have limbs, but they moved with a predatory grace, flowing like spilled ink toward the light of their small campfire. The "found you" echo began to repeat, overlapping itself until the cave was a chaotic chamber of demonic mockery. Joshua stood. He did not look at the shadows, he looked at the black stone vessel. "The air is a witness," Joshua spoke, his voice rising like a tidal wave that silences the shore. "Every scream, every betrayal, every moment of despair is written into the dust. But you are a thief of echoes. You feast on the resonance of the fallen to lure the living into the same pit." Gai Giote, he raised his hand, and the violet light in the filigree turned into a blinding, searing white. Silence. The word was a physical blow. The black stone vessel shattered into a million fragments of harmless obsidian. The shadows on the walls recoiled, shrieking as they were scorched by the sudden, divine purity of the air. The "found you" echo was cut short, replaced by a peace so profound it felt like the weight of the ocean. "The enemy speaks in the echoes of your own fear," Joshua told Thomas and Marcus as the dust settled. "He has no original song, he only distorts the music of the Father. If you hear a voice in the dark that knows your name but does not know your heart, do not answer. To answer is to give the shadow a handle on your soul." Joshua walked to the mouth of the cave and looked out at the jagged horizon. He knew that soon, he would not just be silencing the echoes of the dam, he would be descending into the very source of the scream to silence it forever. The clans tell us that Joshua emerged from those mountains with hands that were scarred not just by wood and stone, but by the friction of the supernatural. He had faced the woven shroud, the inverted head, the bleeding papyrus, the weeping lady, and the recording of the void. He mastered the terrors of the silent years, so that when he stood before the people, he did not speak as a man who had studied the law, but as a king who had already conquered the abyss in the dark. These are the stories the world forgot, the stories of a carpenter who built a bridge across the mouth of hell, one plank at a time, in the years when the Bible chose to remain silent. The war of the wilderness is over. The ministry of light begins.